Money in the financial system is changing fast. Digital money is rising and cash is going extinct. But in this video, I'm going to go over the three main reasons why most people think this is happening. And I'm going to give you the number one reason why I think it's happening even faster. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to understand and be prepared for. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss. I like to talk about making money, investing money, which is having your money make money, and just overall success. I like to talk a lot about cryptocurrencies, the changing of the US and global financial system, what's happening with that. Of course, most importantly, what we need to know and how we can profit from that. So if you like those topics, make sure to go ahead and click like and then hit the subscribe button. Make sure to turn the bell on so you get notified as soon as I put out new videos. Now, today we are talking about cash. We're talking about the changing of the financial system. And I'm sure you've already seen this happening, right? Cash is being banned over and over across the world. We're seeing this, and we've seen, like I said, cash getting banned. We've seen lowering the cash limits from $10,000 to $5,000 in some countries, $1,000. We've seen them removing large bills out of circulation, taking out $100 bills and even smaller denominations in some countries. And so in this video, I'm going to look at three reasons why most people think this is happening. And of course, at the end, I'm going to tell you what I think is the most probable reason. And of course, what we should be paying attention to, why, and then how we can pay attention and profit from it. So reason number one, which seems to be the most popular reason, kind of the most common reason that everybody thinks, is that negative interest rates are happening. And it's easy to see that with negative interest rates, if you're basically being penalized for having your money in the bank. So just to catch you guys up, I'm not going super deep into it, but to catch you guys up, if you're not familiar, when you loan money, you typically get paid your money back plus interest. What negative interest rates are, that means I'm loaning money to you, but instead of you paying me back with interest, I'm paying you to borrow. That's basically what it means. Over half of the world's debt, the government's debt, over $17 trillion is negative yielding. That means it's paying less than zero. If you need to know more about that, leave me a comment down below. We can make a whole separate video about that. I'm not going super deep into that. A little bit of Google searching can also get more information for you on that as well. But so anyway, reason number one, negative interest rates. So the banks are holding money. The banks are actually holding your money, and then their money, the deposits, they keep those at the Federal Reserve. And what happens is they're getting charged a few points, a couple percent interest, to keep their money at the Fed. And of course, why would they want to do that, right? They wouldn't. But as long as there's another place to put that, right? Whether that be gold, cash, etc. So basically, as the banks are holding your money, and then the central banks are holding it, by being charged this penalty, they're basically being forced to spend it, to get it out, to loan it out in the market, right? So we hear about this, and the reasons why they want to do this is the Keynesian economics, is that they think that people should not be saving, they should be spending. And savers are bad for the economy because it causes people just to hold on to assets. But really what we need people to be spending. Everybody should go out and buy more cars and buy more houses, etc. Because, of course, what's better for an economy than for you to spend every single penny you have and not save anything, right? You get that, right? So anyway, you're being penalized, and so they're trying to stimulate this. And so they say, hey, if you don't spend your money and you park it here in savings, we're going to take a piece of it. So that's reason number one. Like I said, that's probably the most common. There's a problem with this theory, and although we're seeing it play out, the problem with the theory is that there's a professor, Richard Werner, and he is an international banking expert, and he's been writing a lot about this, doing videos and stuff like that. And he points out that banks don't actually lend their reserves. So that's a big problem. So we think the banks are being forced to lend it out, but they don't, right? So when we park our money there, the banks have reserves, but they don't loan those reserves out. What happens is they create money, and they do this through what's known as the fractional reserve banking system. I'm going to explain that to you just a little bit. But basically, they don't loan that money out. And so if they're not loaning the money out, then that takes that first reason off the table, right? They're not being penalized or forced to loan that money out because they're not loaning it out anyway. So that's probably off the table. So reason number two is maybe more likely, and this is so that governments have control over your money for two reasons why they'd want to do that, and really just one reason, and it's so they can do bail-ins. And so think about this: if all money is digital, then you have nowhere to extract it out of the system. So right now, I can go to the bank and say, give me all my money in cash. Might be really hard to do that depending on how much money I had. I could put it in other assets, etc. But what happens is, as banks start failing, as banks start getting shaky, the economy start getting weird, people want to go get their money out of the bank. And what happens is it causes what's called a run on the bank, meaning the banks, because of fractional reserve banking, they don't have all those deposits. And so if everybody went to the bank, and actually just a couple percent of people went to the bank to get their monies out, it could cause the banks to collapse. Now, we've seen this happen over and over and over again. Recently, we've seen it happen in Greece. Real recently, we've seen it happen in Iran, even China recently. So that's a run on the bank. And so if the government was forcing you to keep your money in, there was no way to extract it, it was digital, nowhere to take it, then they could prevent a run on the bank because you can't go take it anywhere. But also on top of that, they could do what's called a bail-in. And so I think the first time I remember seeing this happen was in Cyprus in 2012. And the country of Cyprus basically went bankrupt, and they did a bail-in, meaning they went and took money out of people's bank accounts. And depending on how much money you had in the bank, they took a larger percentage. I believe the top percentages were like half of the deposits at banks were taken. And so if you don't think that could happen again, you're sorely mistaken. As a matter of fact, in Australia, they've recently passed a bank bail-in law just for that purpose. And in the United States, we're $23 trillion in debt and counting. We're running trillion-dollar deficits, meaning we're adding trillions of dollars every single year. And so that reason, it definitely makes sense. It's one of them. But again, Richard Werner thinks that's probably not the real reason. He thinks that the real reason is actually something different and maybe even more sinister, if I want to call it that. So assuming that Richard Werner is correct, that banks don't loan out reserves, which we know that, right, because of the fractional reserve banking system. So like I said, all money's created through debt. It's not like I put my money there and they loan it out. When I put my money there, it allows them to create money through debt. So basically, if a bank were to take in $100,000, it could loan out about $1 million. Crazy, right? They basically created that out of nowhere. So the bank holds the reserves, the money I put on deposit, with the Fed. And then those negative interest rates are basically eating into that reserve. So the bank's getting less and less and less and less. And here's the thing. In order for the bank to do the fractional reserve banking system, they need to have reserves. So the more reserves they have, the more money they can loan out, right? So if they have $100,000 on deposit, they could loan out $1 million. But as the Fed starts eating into those reserves by charging them interest, they go from $100,000 to $90,000. Well, now they can loan out, instead of $1 million, they can loan out $900,000. They lost $100,000 of ability to create money. So it decreases their ability to lend. It also increases their costs. And so by doing both of those things, it makes it super hard for these small private banks to operate. So what it does is it increases the cost to consumers, which then again makes it even harder for these small banks to compete with the larger banks. And Richard Werner, like I said, he's been talking about this a lot. There was one article that he wrote. I'm gonna quote from it. And he said that with negative rates, bank margins will stay low and the financial situation of the banks will stay precarious and indeed become even more precarious. So what he's saying is that with negative rates, basically the banks are being charged that the margins, the rates are going to stay so low that they can't make any money loaning it, and they're paying for it to be on reserve at the same time. And so it's really dangerous for them. They don't really have any money. So he went on to say that the ECB, that's the European Central Bank, and the EU have significantly increased regulatory reporting burdens, causing community banks to be forced to merge and shut down. So if we go back through history, we've seen hundreds and even maybe thousands of banks in a lot of countries, and they all kind of compete, as they should, right? If I don't like service at one bank, I go to another. But especially through the 2008 financial crisis, we've really seen this consolidation. We saw, the savings, a lot of the savings and loans banks go out of business, a lot of the community banks going out of business. And what he's saying here is that in Europe, the ECB, because of the increased regulatory burdens, that it's just they're already having their margin squeezed. They're barely making any money, and then they add all these regulatory burdens, and it's basically forcing them out of business. They're forced to either merge with someone else, into a larger bank or to be shut down. And so what's also happened is he says that the banks that mainly engage in traditional banking, i.e. lending to firms for investment, have come under major pressure. But that's what banks are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to be lending to increase the economy. And he went on to say that, and to create profits for large financial institutions engaged in financial speculation. Are you starting to see the picture here? So the banks are supposed to be loaning money to businesses to get the economy moving so they can invest into equipment, invest into research and development, etc. But that's coming under major pressure. So the only thing that's making profits is the large financial institutions that are engaged in financial speculation. These are the futures, the derivatives, things like that. So it's taking it away from a real economy and putting it all into a fake financial economy, which I'm going to explain. And Richard Werner talks about how it's always about power and control for manipulation and distortion, right? So the more money they can control, the fewer banks that they can control, the more power they have, the more manipulation they can have. And he went on to say, the policy of negative interest rates is this consistent with the agenda to drive small banks out of business and consolidate banking sectors in industrialized countries. So again, right, they're trying to drive all these small banks out of business so they can centralize the power so they have more control. And he believes that, small retail banks that are, again, like I said, they're the ones that are responsible for the productive lending, right? It's the small and medium-sized businesses that increase production, economic growth. They lower income inequality by allowing people to have businesses and have businesses compete. They lower inflation by bringing costs down. And so if you wipe out all the small banks and you wipe out all these small businesses, and then the business is left going to the large banks that are only doing large transactions, what happens is they financialize the economy and they start creating these asset bubbles. So if you look at all these pieces and you start connecting the dots, you'll see that by banning cash, what they're doing is they're putting the squeeze on these small banks. And basically they're putting all these small banks out of business. Now, when that happens, when small banks go out of business, and all we have left is big banks that aren't really loaning to businesses, they're just playing financial games, the economy shrinks, right? When the backbone of the economy, which is small and mid-sized businesses, when they have no access to funding, the economy shrinks. Well, that's not good. When the economy shrinks, people are having trouble paying their bills, right? So then the average people are looking to the Fed. They're asking the government for help, right? They can't get ahead anymore. It's too hard to make it. And so basically, the Fed answers and says, well, put your money into the financial markets, put your money into the financial economy, right? So then everybody is forced to bet on asset prices, speculation, and trying to time bubbles up and down. The real economy, which is businesses, starts decreasing, and the financial economy starts increasing exponentially. That's what happens. And the central banks know this. They're not a dummy to this. They know what's going on. And they also know that it's all going to come crashing down. And so all the small banks are out of business. Now all we have left is the big banks. Now, of course, what happens to them? They start looking to the central banks for bailouts. And the central banks, they say, no, not this time. It's not going to happen. We don't think so. We've already bailed you out enough in the past. And this time we're going to let you fail. And now guess what? The central banks are the only game in town. So the small banks lost out to the big banks lost out to the central banks, and now the central bank has 100% control over money, credit, and the entire financial system, which everybody's been forced into because small and medium-sized businesses are out. And of course, at that point, they control you. They control everything, right? And the rise of digital currencies are only enabling this. Now, as of today, about 90% of all transactions are already digital, but they're not digital currencies. And so even though I'm paying with my Visa, Venmo, PayPal, et cetera, it's digital. I'm getting wire transfers, direct deposits, et cetera. It's not really digital currencies in the case of like cryptocurrencies. And so cryptocurrencies are a tool, and they can be used for good and bad. And being used for bad, they can only enable this. And I've made videos about China being the first to adopt digital currency, how they're going to do that. We see lots of other governments are rushing to get on board with this as well. And of course, we have Bitcoin. Bitcoin's an alternative that's not controlled. So it's creating an alternative financial system for us to go to. And this is how we're going to protect ourselves. So this is the way things are going. Is it reason number one, reason number two, or reason number three? that we are seeing cash be banned? Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. 1, 2, or 3. And then is this making progress? Let me know what you think. As always, smash that like button if you like the video. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. Either way, let me know. Leave me a comment down below. I love to get in discussions with every single one of you. And that's it. To your success. I'm out.